Hello there. Welcome to this channel where topics relevant to criminology are always presented. In this video, topic is about the schools of thoughts in criminology. Some of the prominent schools of thoughts in criminology will be discussed in this educational video. There were three main schools of thought in early criminological theory, spanning the period from the mid-18th century to the mid-20th century: the classical, neoclassical, and positivist/Chicago. The pre-classical school of criminology. This school was in its youth in the 17th to 18th century. The main proponent of this school is St. Thomas Aquinas. It is based on the principle of demonology, witchcraft, and supernatural power. The main postulates of this school are as under. 1. Crime is committed due to the instigation of the devil or some evil spirit. 2. The influence of the spirit impels us to commit a crime. 3. It laid down the primary focus of crime causation to religion and spirituality. The good fortune or evil/good supernatural forces lead a human being towards the ill use of the free will. 4. Crime is the net result of the demonic possession and the consequences thereof, evil abuse of the free will. 5. The Christian idea of original sin, which says that all human beings were considered born sinners. So the questions such as what causes crime are of no value. 6. Naturalism and spiritualism formed the backbone of its crime causation. It is also known as the deterministic approach to crime causation. These ideologies altogether excluded the individual responsibility in the commission of the crime. Because not only human actions are governed by nature but even human passion. What are the schools of thought that explain the origin of criminal behavior? 1. Classical school. 2. Neoclassical school. 3. Positivist school. Let us now discuss each school. Classical school of thought, the Age of Enlightenment. 18th century, of Cesare Beccaria and Jeremy Bentham. Please study this situation. Roy is interested in criminology. Previously in his class in the Introduction to Criminology course he heard about the barbaric system of law, punishment, and justice that existed. This is before the period of enlightenment. But what the traditional classical school is about is still not quite clear to him. To understand classical school, Roy's teacher tells him to remember the 5 key principles of the classical school, namely: 1. Rationality. The classical school assumes that people have free will and that they choose to commit crimes. For example, if Roy decides to steal some candy at the store, he is not forced to, based on some predestiny. He chooses to steal that candy. Not only that, he thinks about it beforehand and says to himself. 2. Hedonism. The classical school also assumes that people seek pleasure and try to avoid pain. For example, when Roy looks at the candy in the store, he thinks about how it will please him, so he steals it. 3. Punishment. Remember how we said that a key idea was the idea of hedonism, pleasure seeking, and pain avoidance? Well, that informs punishment, according to the classical school. The classical school of criminology believes that punishment works as a deterrent to crime. For human rights, Roy has learned that before the classical school of criminology, punishments could be very harsh indeed. It was not uncommon to torture someone who was only suspected of a crime, and the punishments once convicted could be horrifying. 5. Legality. Criminal justice process must be predictable. Laws and punishment should be known to the public. Roy must know when he committed crimes the punishment is already knowing. According to the classical school of criminology, individuals have the rights which need to be respected by society. That means that they should not torture or institute an unreasonably harsh punishment. For example, if Jordan gets caught stealing the candy, we wouldn't expect that his punishment would involve cutting his hand off. The theory doesn't give distinction on the age of the individual and the handicap. As mentioned previously, the main proponents of this school are Cesare Beccaria and Jeremy Bentham. It is important to note that Beccaria is known as the father of the classical school of criminology. He presented his key ideas on the abolition of torture as a legitimate means of extracting confessions. The classical theory maintains that man is essentially a moral creature with absolute free will to choose between good and evil, therefore stress is placed upon the criminal himself, that every man is responsible for his actions. Free will, Beccaria, a philosophy advocating punishment severe enough for people to choose, to avoid criminal acts. It includes the belief that a certain criminal act warrants a certain punishment without any variation. Three deterrence concepts that were the cornerstone of the classical deterrence doctrine of Beccaria. 1. Severe. 2. Certain. 3. Swift. 1. Severe. Punishment must outweigh the rewards of the illegal action. Proportionality are sometimes at odds, especially since each person is different in terms of what constitutes punishment. 2. Certain. People must know they will be punished for their illegal behavior. People can't evade the law for any reason. 3. Swift. Punishment should not be delayed. You can't have the punishment linger or the punishment and the crime lose their association. Jeremy Bentham and the Panopticon Prison. Best known as the founder of utilitarianism/hedonism. Hedonism/utilitarianism, Bentham, the greatest happiness principle: every activity should serve an aim, the greatest principle of happiness, the effect on the happiness of the community should all be judged, the greatest happiness of many people. The belief that people choose pleasure and avoid pain. According to Bentham's utilitarianism theory, people are guided by a desire for pleasure and aversion to pain. The Panopticon Prison. The Panopticon is a type of hierarchical structure and control mechanism developed in the 18th century by Jeremy Bentham, an English philosopher and social theorist. The term panopticon derives from the Greek word panoptes, which means all-seeing. The next school of thought is the neoclassical school of criminology. The neoclassical school of criminology argued that situations or circumstances that made it impossible to exercise free will are reasons to exempt the accused from conviction. This school of thought maintains that while the classical doctrine is correct in general, it should be modified in certain details, that children and lunatics should not be regarded as criminals and free from punishment. It must take into account certain mitigating circumstances. Neoclassical criminology can be defined, simply, as a school of thought that assumes criminal behavior as situationally dynamic and individually determined. Neoclassical theories of crime suggest that crime prevention, reduction, or eradication can take place more strictly: child-rearing practices, increased fines, and or improved supervision and protection. Neoclassical thought is normally aligned with socially conservative policies on crime prevention. The primary explanation for this is that such ideas support rising violent forms of policing, zero tolerance, probation, and extended jail sentences for all crimes. Neoclassicism places great emphasis on free will and human rationality. It simply slightly refinement these ideas to work in the world and daily criminal justice systems operations. This model provided an insight into potential forces that could undermine free will. Social security systems have taken on this characteristic of social actions in all advanced industrial societies. The neoclassical school of criminology argued that situations or circumstances that made it impossible to exercise free will are reasons to exempt the accused from conviction. This school of thought maintains that while the classical doctrine is correct in general, it should be modified in certain details, that children and lunatics should not be regarded as criminals and free from punishment. It must take into account certain mitigating circumstances. The last school of thought in criminology is the Positivist/Italian school. Maintain that crime as any other act is a natural phenomenon and is comparable to disaster or calamity. that crime as a social and moral phenomenon which cannot be treated and checked by the imposition of punishment but rather rehabilitation or the enforcement of individual measures. Cesare Lombroso and his two students, Enrico Ferri and Raffaele Garofalo, advocated this school. Who are the proponents of the positivist schools of criminology? Cesare Lombroso and two students, Enrico Ferri and Raffaele Garofalo, the Holy Three in criminology, advocated this school. Cesare Lombroso, 1836–1909, the Italian leader of the Positivist school of criminology, was criticized for his methodology and his attention to the biological characteristics of offenders, but his emphasis on the need to study offenders scientifically earned him the father of modern criminology. His major contribution is the development of a scientific approach to the study of criminal behavior and to reform the criminal law. He wrote the essay entitled Crime, Its Causes and Remedies that contains his key ideas and the classifications of criminals. Classifications of criminals by Lombroso. 1. Born criminals. There are born criminals according to Lombroso, that being criminal is inherited. 2. Criminal by passion, are individuals who are easily influenced by great emotions like fit of anger. 3. Insane criminals, are those who commit crime due to abnormalities or psychological disorders. They should be exempted from criminal liability. 4. Criminaloid, a person who commits crime due to less physical stamina/self-control. 5. Occasional criminal, are those who commit crime due to insignificant reasons that pushed them to do at a given occasion. 6. Pseudo-criminals, are those who kill in self-defense. Enrico Ferri, 1856–1929, he was the best-known Lombroso's associate. His greatest contribution was his attack on the classical doctrine of free will, which argued that criminals should be held morally responsible for their crimes because they must have made a rational decision to commit the crime. Ferri's greatest contribution to criminology is his law on criminal saturation. This theory presupposes the synthetic result of the crime with three key factors. 1. Physical or geographical. 2. Anthropological, and 3. Psychological or social. Raffaele Garofalo, 1852–1934, another follower of Lombroso, an Italian nobleman, magistrate, senator, and professor of law. Like Lombroso and Ferri, he rejected the doctrine of free will and supported the position that the only way to understand crime was to study it by scientific methods. Influenced on Lombroso's theory of atavistic stigmata, man's inferior/animalistic behavior, he traced the roots of criminal behavior not to physical features but to their psychological equivalents, which he called moral anomalies. He stressed that lack of compassion leads to crimes against individuals and a lack of integrity for property crimes. Regarding the classification of suspects, Ferri was refused and the offenders were categorized into four major categories. 1. Murders whom he called endemic criminals. 2. Violent criminals who are affected by environmental influences such as prejudices of honor, politics, and religion. 3. Criminals lacking in the sentiment of probity, and 4. Lascivious or lustful criminals who commit crimes against sex and chastity. How do positivist/Italian school views crimes in its context? Empirical objectivity for criminal behavior assessment and quantification. Crime as a social and moral phenomenon that cannot be treated and checked by the imposition of punishment but rather rehabilitation or the enforcement of individual measures. Explains that criminals behave differently and have their own distinct set of characteristics than non-criminals. What are the three main types of positivism? 1. Biological positivism. 2. Psychological positivism. 3. Social positivism. 1. Biological positivism. If the theory of evolution of Charles Darwin was scientifically applicable to animals, the same approach would apply to man as to animal. It meant that animals must adapt to their surroundings, which would produce a new species over time. Biological positivism is a philosophy that takes the traits and actions of a person that makes them criminal. The theory states that people are born criminals and others are not. What are the classes of biological positivism? 1.1 Physical characteristics. Criminals are biologically distinguishable from law-abiding citizens. 1.2 Intelligence. Intelligence is closely related to aggression and crime. 1.3 Other medical factors. Now that you have successfully completed the educational video on School of Thought's origin of criminological theories, I hope that you learned from the presentation. Good luck. If you have questions about the topic, you can post it in the comment box below. This ends the discussion. See you in the next video about biological theories of crime causation. Enjoy learning. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button for update. Have a nice day.